June 22, 1983, and Lake Haven Summer Camp sat nestled among towering pines on the shores of Crystal Lake in northern Minnesota, a place where children spent summers swimming and hiking and learning outdoor skills away from city life. The lake stretched for 3 miles surrounded by dense forest, its water clear and cold even in summer, and the camp had operated for 25 years without a single serious incident until that Wednesday afternoon. Aria and Brielle Thornton were 14 years old that summer, identical twins with long dark hair they wore in matching braids, hazel eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a bond so strong that counselors said they seemed to communicate without words. The girls were from Chicago and had been coming to Lake Haven every summer since they were 8, and they'd become expert canoeists who loved paddling across the lake to explore hidden coves and watch wildlife. That afternoon they wore matching orange life jackets over white camp t-shirts, denim shorts, and water shoes, and they carried their paddles down to the dock with the confidence of experienced paddlers. Their counselor Jessica Martinez was supervising afternoon waterfront activities, watching 6 pairs of campers practicing canoe strokes and water safety techniques in the designated swimming area, marked by buoys about 50 yards from shore. Aria and Brielle, you two can take the blue canoe and practice your J-strokes out past the buoys, Jessica called at 2:15 p.m., knowing the twins were advanced enough to paddle independently beyond the beginner area. The twins smiled at each other with that identical expression they shared, that unspoken communication that made people wonder if twins really could read each other's minds, and they pushed off from the dock. Jessica watched them paddle smoothly across the water with synchronized strokes that made the canoe glide effortlessly, heading toward the far side of the swimming area where they could practice without colliding with less experienced campers. The afternoon was perfect for canoeing with mild temperatures around 75 degrees, clear skies and barely any wind to create waves, and approximately 30 other campers were visible participating in various waterfront activities. At 2:25 p.m., Jessica did a visual count of all campers in the water as camp protocol required, and she counted the blue canoe with Aria and Brielle paddling about 75 yards from shore, just beyond the buoy line. She turned her attention to help a younger camper who was struggling with her paddle grip, spending maybe 3 or 4 minutes demonstrating proper technique and adjusting the girl's hand position on the shaft. When Jessica looked back toward the lake to do another count at approximately 2:30 p.m., the blue canoe was floating empty about 80 yards from shore, drifting slowly with paddles resting across the seats. Aria and Brielle were nowhere to be seen, not in the canoe, not swimming nearby, not anywhere visible on the vast expanse of Crystal Lake that stretched calm and undisturbed in every direction. Jessica's heart stopped as she counted again frantically, hoping she'd miscounted or the twins were hidden behind another canoe. But the terrible reality became clear. 2 14-year-old girls had vanished from their canoe in broad daylight. "Emergency! Missing swimmers!" Jessica screamed, blowing her whistle in the pattern that signaled all waterfront activities to cease immediately, and within seconds other counselors were sprinting toward the dock. In less than 5 minutes, while Jessica had been focused on helping one camper, Aria and Brielle Thornton had disappeared from their canoe without a splash or scream or any indication that something was wrong. If this mystery has captured your attention, make sure to subscribe for more unsolved cases, hit that like button, and comment with your theories about what happened to the twins. Now let's see how the search unfolded. Camp Director Michael Chen immediately activated emergency protocols, with counselors accounting for every other camper, while lifeguards launched rescue boats and began searching the area where the blue canoe floated empty. The canoe was retrieved quickly and examined. Both orange life jackets were inside the canoe, removed and placed neatly on the seats, along with both paddles positioned carefully across the gunnels. This detail was immediately alarming because camp rules strictly required life jackets to remain on at all times while in watercraft, and the twins knew these rules and had always followed them without exception. 3 lifeguards dove repeatedly in the area where the canoe had been found, searching underwater for any sign of the girls, and the lake was only about 15 feet deep in that location with good visibility. They found nothing on the lake bottom except sand and rocks and aquatic plants. No bodies, no additional clothing, no indication that anyone had been in the water at all in that location. Additional counselors launched every available canoe and kayak to search the shoreline and far reaches of the lake, calling the twins' names across the water that remained eerily calm and silent except for echoing voices. The Minnesota State Police were contacted at 2:45 p.m., and Sheriff Robert Anderson arrived at Lake Haven within 20 minutes with deputies and search and rescue resources from 3 counties. By 3:30 p.m., dive teams from the state police were in the water conducting a systematic grid search of the entire swimming area and beyond, using sonar equipment to scan for bodies or disturbances on the lake bottom. The sonar revealed nothing unusual. No bodies, no large objects, just the normal contours of the lake bed and some submerged logs that had been there for years according to camp records. Parents of all campers were notified about the incident, and Aria and Brielle's mother, Susan Thornton, received the call at her Chicago home that shattered her world into pieces she'd never be able to put back together. Susan Thornton and her husband Richard were on a plane to Minnesota within 3 hours, flying through a haze of terror and disbelief that their daughters could have vanished from a supervised camp activity in the middle of a calm afternoon. By 5 p.m., over 100 people were involved in the search effort, with boats crisscrossing Crystal Lake while divers continued underwater searches and volunteers walked the shoreline calling the twins' names into the dense forest. Sheriff Anderson interviewed Jessica Martinez extensively, asking her to recall every detail of those critical minutes when the twins had disappeared, and Jessica replayed the scene in her mind with agonizing precision. They were paddling normally, practicing their strokes like I'd asked them to do, Jessica said through tears. I looked away for maybe 3 or 4 minutes to help another camper, and when I looked back the canoe was empty. The fact that both life jackets had been removed and placed neatly in the canoe suggested the action had been deliberate, rather than the result of an accident or panic. But why would experienced swimmers remove their safety equipment? Michael Chen reviewed camp logs showing that Aria and Brielle had passed their advanced swimmer tests and had hundreds of hours of canoe experience, and they'd never shown any reckless behavior or disregard for safety rules. These girls were responsible and skilled. They wouldn't just jump out of the canoe for fun or take off their life jackets, Chen told investigators. Something happened that we're not understanding, something that made them behave completely out of character. Dive teams searched until darkness made underwater work impossible, having covered the entire swimming area and extending their grid to include deeper sections of the lake where bodies might have drifted or sunk. They found absolutely nothing related to the missing twins, and the lead diver told Sheriff Anderson, if those girls went into this water, there would be some trace, but it's like they were never here at all. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging flew over Crystal Lake and surrounding forest at dusk, searching for heat signatures, but the technology was limited by the dense tree canopy and cold water temperature that would mask a body's heat. By nightfall, the Thornton parents arrived at Lake Haven and stood on the dock where their daughters had launched their canoe just hours earlier, and Susan collapsed sobbing while Richard held her with his own tears falling silently. They're excellent swimmers, Richard told Sheriff Anderson desperately. They've been swimming since they were 3 years old. They could tread water for hours if they had to. They have to be out there somewhere. Searchlights illuminated Crystal Lake throughout the night as boats continued scanning the surface, and divers took shifts searching underwater, refusing to stop even though the statistical likelihood of survival decreased with every passing hour. Other campers were interviewed individually, asked if they'd seen anything unusual or heard the twins say anything about leaving the swimming area, but every child reported the same thing. Aria and Brielle had paddled away normally. A 12-year-old camper named Sophie Chen mentioned that she'd seen the blue canoe heading toward the north shore around 2:25 p.m., and the twins had been waving at someone, though Sophie couldn't see who. I thought maybe they were waving at a counselor or another boat, Sophie explained. But they were definitely waving and smiling. They looked happy, not scared or anything weird. This detail sent investigators scrambling to determine who might have been on the north shore that the twins would have recognized and waved at, but camp records showed no scheduled activities in that area. The north shore was heavily forested with no facilities or docks, and it was generally avoided by campers because the approach was rocky, and the trees grew right down to the water's edge, creating shadows. Search teams on boats approached the north shore and found several places where a canoe could potentially land, and they discovered what appeared to be fresh scrape marks on rocks, suggesting a boat had recently come ashore. K9 units were brought in at first light on Thursday morning and given scent samples from the twins' pillowcases, and the dogs tracked along the north shore, becoming very interested in one particular landing spot. The dogs followed a scent trail about 30 yards into the forest before losing it completely in a small clearing, surrounded by dense undergrowth, and handlers said the dogs were acting confused as if the scent simply ended. It's the same behavior we saw on the water, the lead handler told Sheriff Anderson. The scent is strong up to a point and then it's just gone, like the girls evaporated or were lifted off the ground. This impossible evidence echoed what divers had reported about the lake. All signs pointed to Aria and Brielle existing one moment, and then simply ceasing to exist the next with no logical explanation. FBI agents arrived Thursday afternoon from the Minneapolis field office and immediately began investigating the possibility that the twins had been abducted from the lake by someone waiting on the North Shore. Agent Patricia Collins reviewed all camp personnel records and conducted background checks on every staff member looking for anyone with criminal history or concerning behavior. But Lake Haven's hiring practices were thorough and everyone checked out clean. The theory emerged that someone had lured the twins to the North Shore by calling to them or signaling, convincing them to remove their life jackets and come ashore where they were grabbed before they could scream or resist. But this theory raised more questions than it answered. Who would the twins trust enough to approach voluntarily? How did this person access the remote North Shore without being seen? And where did they go with two struggling teenagers? The search expanded dramatically on Friday with over 300 volunteers combing every inch of forest surrounding Crystal Lake, checking hiking trails and abandoned structures and any place where two girls might be held or hidden. Roadblocks were established on all routes leading away from the area, and police checked every vehicle looking for any sign of the missing twins or anyone acting suspiciously, but the effort yielded no results. The empty blue canoe became a haunting symbol of the mystery, photographed extensively by investigators trying to understand what the neatly placed life jackets and carefully positioned paddles might reveal about the twins' final moments. Some investigators believed the arranged nature of the items suggested the girls had removed them voluntarily and methodically, perhaps responding to instructions from someone they trusted or believed was in authority. Others theorized that whoever took the twins had arranged the items to make the scene appear less suspicious, or to buy time before the disappearance was noticed, though this seemed overly elaborate for an abduction. Susan Thornton was interviewed extensively about the twins' personalities and relationships, and she insisted that Aria and Brielle had no enemies, no secret boyfriends, no reason to fake their disappearance or run away from camp. They loved Lake Haven. They looked forward to it all year, Susan said through constant tears. They had friends here. They were happy. This wasn't some teenage rebellion or escape plan. Something terrible happened to them. The twins' cabin was searched thoroughly and their belongings were examined for any clue about their state of mind. But investigators found only typical teenage possessions: diaries full of camp activities, letters to friends back home, and photos of happy moments. Brielle's diary entry from June 21st, the night before they vanished, read, "Can't wait for canoe practice tomorrow. Aria and I are going to ace our strokes and maybe explore the North Shore if Jessica lets us go that far." The mention of exploring the North Shore seemed significant, but Jessica Martinez insisted she'd given the twins no such permission and had explicitly told them to stay in the designated practice area beyond the buoys. Tips began flooding in from people claiming to have seen the twins at gas stations and shopping malls across Minnesota and neighboring states, and every reported sighting was investigated with decreasing hope. A truck driver reported seeing two girls matching the twins' description at a rest stop on Interstate 94, but security footage showed the girls were several years older and clearly not the missing Thorntons. A family in Duluth called saying two teenagers fitting the description had knocked on their door asking for water, but when investigators showed them photos they admitted the girls looked different and they'd been mistaken. Richard Thornton hired private investigators to conduct an independent search, unable to trust that law enforcement was doing enough or looking in the right places, and the PIs retraced every step of the official investigation. They interviewed campers again, examined the North Shore more extensively, and even had the blue canoe analyzed by forensic experts. But they discovered nothing new beyond what police had already found. The case was featured on local and national news broadcasts with photos of the identical twins side by side, and the images of the two smiling girls with matching braids broke hearts across America. A reward fund was established offering $25,000 for information leading to the twins' safe return, and the fund grew to over $100,000 as donations poured in from strangers moved by the story. Psychics began contacting the family claiming to have visions of where the girls were being held, with one insisting they were in a cabin near the Canadian border, and another claiming they'd been taken to Chicago by someone from their past. Every psychic lead was investigated despite law enforcement skepticism, because the Thornton parents couldn't risk ignoring something that might be legitimate even if the odds were astronomical. By July, the intensive daily searches were scaled back to weekend volunteer efforts, and the statistical reality that the twins were likely dead began settling over the investigation like a suffocating blanket. Lake Haven summer camp closed for the remainder of the summer and ultimately never reopened, unable to recover from the tragedy and the parents who would never again trust their children to the facility. Michael Chen, the camp director, was investigated thoroughly for any possible involvement, but was cleared completely, and he lived the rest of his life carrying guilt over what had happened under his supervision. Jessica Martinez left camp counseling and never worked with children again, unable to forgive herself for looking away during those critical minutes when something impossible had occurred on her watch. The scrape marks on the North Shore rocks were photographed and cast but never matched to any specific canoe or boat, and the clearing where the dog's scent trail ended was excavated but revealed nothing buried beneath the forest floor. By August, the case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted, generating thousands of new tips that kept investigators busy for months. But every lead dissolved into nothing, just like all the ones before. The theory that someone had been camping illegally on the North Shore and had grabbed the twins opportunistically was explored extensively, but searches found no evidence of recent camping activity in that isolated area. Another theory suggested the twins had been lured into the forest by someone they knew from previous summers, possibly an older camper or former counselor, but background checks on everyone connected to Lake Haven revealed no suspects. The most disturbing theory proposed by some investigators was that a predator had been watching the camp, and specifically targeting the twins, waiting for the perfect moment when they were isolated and vulnerable. The investigation continued through 1984 with diminishing intensity, and Crystal Lake was drained partially in October to allow more thorough searches of the bottom, but the effort revealed only old debris and no trace of the missing twins. Susan and Richard Thornton's lives became consumed by the search, with Richard quitting his job to dedicate himself full-time to finding their daughters, while Susan fell into depression so severe she required hospitalization. The couple's marriage deteriorated under the crushing weight of grief and blame, with arguments erupting over whether they should have sent the girls to camp or if they'd been negligent for letting them paddle beyond the buoys. They divorced in 1986, both acknowledging that staying together meant constantly being reminded of what they'd lost, and they couldn't heal while living in the same house where the twins' empty bedrooms waited. Age progression photos were created showing what Aria and Brielle might look like at 16, then 18, then 20, and these images were distributed nationally through missing children organizations and law enforcement networks. The FBI periodically reviewed the case, comparing it to other missing children cases in the Midwest, looking for patterns that might connect Aria and Brielle's disappearance to similar incidents, and disturbing similarities emerged. Between 1980 and 1985, 4 other children had vanished from summer camps and outdoor recreation areas across Minnesota and Wisconsin, all disappearing during water activities with minimal evidence left behind. None of these cases had been solved, and Agent Collins believed they might be connected to a single predator who specifically targeted children at camps and lakes, someone with knowledge of water rescue procedures and wilderness areas. The theory was compelling but impossible to prove without identifying a suspect, and despite extensive investigation, no individual emerged who had connections to all the locations where children had disappeared. By 1990, Aria and Brielle would have been 21 years old, theoretically graduating college or starting careers, and their parents held separate birthday gatherings on March 15th each year, unable to stop marking time. Susan moved to Arizona, trying to escape the Minnesota landscape that reminded her of the lake where her daughters had vanished. But geography couldn't erase memories or fill the void their absence created. Richard stayed in Chicago and became involved with support groups for parents of missing children, helping others navigate the specific torture of not knowing whether to grieve or hope. He testified before Congress about the need for better safety protocols at camps, and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies investigating missing children cases across state lines. Lake Haven property was sold in 1992, and the land reverted to state forest, with the old docks and buildings gradually being reclaimed by nature, and the site became a place locals avoided instinctively. Hikers occasionally reported strange feelings when passing near the north shore of Crystal Lake, sensations of being watched or hearing voices carried across the water, though most attributed this to knowledge of what had happened there. In 2000, Human remains were discovered in a wooded area about 60 miles from Crystal Lake, and Susan received the call that she'd simultaneously dreaded and desperately wanted for 17 years. DNA testing took 3 agonizing weeks, and the results showed the remains belonged to a young woman who'd disappeared in 1975, having no connection to Aria and Brielle Thornton, and Susan experienced the familiar devastation. New investigators occasionally reviewed the cold case file using advancing forensic technology to re-examine the minimal evidence, but the blue canoe and life jackets yielded no DNA or fingerprints beyond those of the twins themselves. The scrape marks on the North Shore rocks had been thoroughly documented in 1983, but the casts were useless without a boat to compare them to, and whatever vessel might have been involved had never been identified. Detective James Morrison was assigned to review the case in 2008 as part of Minnesota's Cold Case Initiative, and he spent 8 months reinvestigating every aspect with modern databases and analytical tools. Morrison interviewed Jessica Martinez, who was now in her 50s and still haunted by those minutes when she'd looked away, and he spoke with former campers now in their 40s who remembered the twins as vibrant girls. The evidence suggests they went to the North Shore voluntarily, Morrison told his captain. They removed their life jackets carefully. They paddled to a specific location. They may have been meeting someone, but who and why remains completely unknown. The theory that the twins had been communicating with someone before that day was explored through examination of their diaries and letters, but investigators found no indication of secret correspondence or concerning relationships. Social media and internet databases were searched extensively for any sign that the twins might be alive and living under different identities, but facial recognition technology and age progression matching produced no credible results. Richard Thornton died in 2015 at age 68 from cancer, and his final words to friends were reportedly, "I'll find my girls now," suggesting he believed death might reunite him with his daughters. Susan attended Richard's funeral from a distance, and afterward, she stood at Crystal Lake's North Shore for the first time in 32 years, staring at the water that had taken her children and never given them back. True crime communities on the internet became fascinated with the Thornton twins case, analyzing every detail and proposing elaborate theories about coordinated abduction, witness protection relocation, or voluntary disappearance to escape abuse. But people who'd known the family vehemently rejected theories of abuse or family problems, insisting the Thorntons had been loving parents and the twins had been happy, well-adjusted teenagers with no reason to run. The case was featured on multiple podcasts and YouTube channels in the 2010s and 2020s, introducing new generations to the mystery and generating periodic surges of tips that investigators dutifully followed up on. By 2024, Aria and Brielle Thornton would be 55 years old, possibly grandmothers themselves, living lives that exist only in the painful imagination of those who knew them as vibrant 14-year-old girls who loved canoeing. Susan Thornton, now 82 and living in a Phoenix assisted living facility, keeps age progression photos beside her bed, showing what her daughters might look like as middle-aged women with gray in their hair and lines around their eyes. She checks missing persons databases when her health allows, though her children gently discourage this habit because they know the obsession prevented their mother from ever truly living after 1983. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension maintains the case in their cold case unit, and it's reviewed whenever new investigative techniques become available or when bodies are discovered that might match the twins' descriptions. Detective Sarah Chen was assigned to review the Thornton case in 2023 using modern forensic technology and genealogical DNA databases, and she spent 4 months examining evidence that had been preserved for 41 years. "This case defies every pattern I've studied in missing persons investigations," Chen told reporters. 2 experienced swimmers vanished from a canoe in broad daylight, leaving their life jackets neatly arranged, with no bodies ever found and no witnesses to what happened. Crystal Lake was searched again in 2019 using advanced sonar and underwater robotics that could examine areas inaccessible to divers in 1983, but the technology revealed nothing except the lake's natural contours and decades of accumulated debris. The blue canoe from that day was eventually donated to a museum dedicated to unsolved mysteries, displayed with the orange life jackets and paddles positioned exactly as they'd been found, a frozen moment of the inexplicable. The North Shore clearing where search dogs had lost the twins' scent has been examined by multiple forensic teams over the decades, and ground-penetrating radar in 2015 showed no evidence of burial sites or hidden structures. Theories about what happened to Aria and Brielle have evolved with cultural shifts. In the 1980s, people focused on stranger abduction. The 1990s brought trafficking theories, and the 2000s introduced discussions of serial predators targeting camps. More recently, some investigators have proposed that the twins were victims of a highly organized crime network that specifically targeted identical twins for unknown purposes, though no evidence supports this elaborate scenario. The most persistent theory remains that someone on the North Shore called to the twins, someone they recognized and trusted, convincing them to come ashore where they were grabbed before they could resist or call for help. But this theory requires explaining how this person accessed the remote location, transported two struggling teenagers without being seen, and left no physical evidence in the forest or on the roads leading away from Lake Haven. Former campers who were at Lake Haven that June day and are now in their 50s occasionally gather for memorial events on June 22nd, keeping the twins' memory alive and hoping publicity might generate new leads. Jessica Martinez, now 71 and living in California, still carries guilt about those minutes when she looked away, and she's told therapists that she replays that afternoon constantly wondering what she might have seen if she'd been watching. The case has inspired numerous fictional works, including novels and documentary series, and Crystal Lake has become embedded in Minnesota folklore as a place where inexplicable things happen and children should be watched carefully. Some investigators have theorized that the twins staged their own disappearance to escape something at home or to start new lives, but everyone who knew the family insists this is impossible, given their close relationship with their parents. Financial records from 1983 showed the Thornton family had no money problems. Psychological evaluations found no signs of abuse or dysfunction, and the twins' diaries revealed normal teenage concerns without hints of planning an escape. The neatly arranged life jackets remain the most puzzling piece of evidence, suggesting deliberate action rather than panic or accident, and multiple behavioral analysts have tried to interpret what this arrangement might reveal about the twins' final moments. Some believe it indicates the girls were following instructions from someone they trusted, while others think it shows they were calm and methodical, even in a crisis. But no interpretation can definitively explain the behavior. DNA samples from the twins' hairbrushes and toothbrushes have been preserved and are automatically compared against every unidentified body entered into national databases, but no matches have ever emerged in 41 years. This suggests either the twins are still alive somewhere, possibly living under different identities with no memory of their past, or their remains were hidden so effectively that they have never been discovered despite extensive searches. Susan Thornton has stated she wants to be cremated when she dies and have her ashes scattered at Crystal Lake's North Shore, the last place her daughters were known to have been, hoping that somehow this will bring her closer to them. The Minnesota State Police continue to receive occasional tips about the case, and every lead is investigated no matter how much time has passed, because investigators refuse to let the Thornton twins become forgotten statistics. But as of today, more than 40 years after Aria and Brielle Thornton paddled away from the dock at Lake Haven Summer Camp, their fate remains completely unknown, and their case remains one of Minnesota's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The security of knowing what happened has never come for their family or the community that watched them vanish, and the questions persist. Where did they go? Who took them? And why has no evidence ever surfaced? The case stands as a reminder that even in supervised environments with multiple witnesses and modern investigation techniques, people can vanish so completely that it's as if they never existed at all. And at Crystal Lake, where the water remains clear and cold and the North Shore forest grows wild and untouched, the mystery of what happened to two identical twins endures as one of America's most baffling unsolved cases. Somewhere perhaps someone knows what happened on that June afternoon in 1983, whether they were involved directly or witnessed something they never reported or discovered information they kept to themselves for reasons known only to them. Until that person comes forward, or until physical evidence emerges that can finally explain the unexplainable, Aria and Brielle Thornton remain frozen in time as 14-year-old girls in orange life jackets, missing from a Minnesota lake and never found. Their story continues to haunt those who hear it, a reminder that some mysteries defy solution, that some families never receive closure, and that some questions remain unanswered no matter how desperately we search for the truth that might bring peace.